Welcome to the third episode of Demon Slayer anime fanfiction. You can find the previous episodes on my channel. This episode is called The Path. A thin mist floated among the dense trees of the mountain, and a cold breeze passing through the dry leaves carried a vague and unfamiliar whisper. The shadows of the trees under the dim moonlight trembled, and every sound, even the soft rustle of Nezuko's steps on the ground, seemed loud and threatening to her. She held her breath, her gaze darting around as her mind wrestled with the promises she had made to Tanjiro. Still lost in thought, a soft but sudden voice broke the silence of the forest. "You must be Nezuko-chan." Nezuko froze, startled. Her eyes scanned the darkness for the source of the voice, but she saw nothing. Then the sound of calm footsteps arose behind her. "Come inside." She turned to see a woman standing at the doorway of a small cabin. The moonlight faintly illuminated her face. Her eyes were calm yet deep, her expression resembling a shadow in the mist. The woman's gaze shifted to the wooden box in Nezuko's hands, and a soft but cold smile spread across her lips. "You need to bring that inside. It's dangerous here at night." Still defensive, Nezuko hesitated. However, something in the woman's eyes felt like a spell, compelling her to obey. She clutched the box tighter and took cautious steps toward the small cabin. Inside, an unusual smell lingered, not unpleasant, but heavy. Perhaps it was from the small fire burning in a corner. The woman, whose name was Makomo, sat delicately in the corner, her posture bearing the weight of years of experience. She gestured with a nod, inviting Nezuko to sit on a worn-out mat. "My name is Makomo. You must be Nezuko." Her voice was soft but serious, the same voice Nezuko had heard earlier. Still feeling watched, Nezuko spoke in a quiet and slightly shaky tone. "Yes. Thank you for agreeing to train me." Makomo briefly looked away. Her hand rested on the ground, her fingers gently tracing the soft soil. "Good. But before we begin, I need to see if you're even suited for this. Tomorrow morning, I'll test you." Nezuko nodded in agreement, though her eyes were drawn to Makomo's severed hand, which moved with graceful precision. Curiosity filled her gaze, but she didn't want to seem impolite. Yet, unable to hold back, she asked, "Your hand, what happened to it?" Makomo's faint smile disappeared for a moment. A shadow of sorrow crossed her eyes. She slowly extended her remaining hand toward the small fire, as if seeking its warmth to keep her bitter memories alive. "I lost it in a battle with a Kizuki." Her voice softened, carrying a slight tremble. Surprised, Nezuko leaned forward slightly, her voice now a whisper. "Which Kizuki?" Makomo raised her head and looked directly at Nezuko. Her expression took on a warning look, as though guarding a secret she wasn't ready to share. "Nezuko, how do you know about the Kizuki?" Nezuko hesitated. For a moment, she felt she should withhold the truth, but Makomo's piercing gaze left her no escape. "One of my ancestors spoke about demon slayers and demons." Makomo paused, as though weighing Nezuko's words. Finally, she nodded slightly and looked away. "Well, then you should know that the Kizuki I fought was one of the upper ranks. Kizuki 4. Nezuko's breath hitched. Her eyes widened and a faint tremor crept into her voice. "Upper rank? You mean—" "I mean one of the 6 strongest demons." Makomo said this as she gazed out the window. A cold light seeped through the mist, casting her features in a somber glow. "My hand was the only casualty of that battle." Nezuko stayed silent, unable to tear her gaze from Makomo. There was something in her eyes, a sense of being trapped between the bitter memories of the past and an unfinished duty. You should rest. Tomorrow you have a test. If you pass, we'll begin your training. Makomo stood as she said this. Her voice had lost the warmth it once held. Now, it was cold and firm. Nezuko stared at the fire, her thoughts consumed by Makomo's face and the story that remained incomplete. Something about this woman left her both uneasy and deeply curious. Nezuko still felt sleepy, but something inside her shifted, as though an inaudible sound was waking her up. At first, she thought it might be Tanjiro leaving or still busy with his mission. Everything around her was quiet and still, with no sound except her own breathing. Her hand moved involuntarily, as if trying to free herself from the heavy sleep that had overtaken her. She mumbled, "Why won't you let me sleep?" A deep silence filled the air. From the moment she opened her eyes, she could only hear soft taps on her forehead. She couldn't fully grasp why she was being asked to wake up at that moment. Again, she said, "Why won't you let me sleep?" Her eyes opened with great effort, and she struggled to focus. Through her blurred vision, she saw Tanjiro, now wearing a mouthpiece. Something inside her quickly recognized it, but a deep feeling of confusion seeped into her. Why was he wearing that mouthpiece? Tanjiro never wore one. Nezuko only looked at him, still unable to fully comprehend the situation. Makomo, who was smiling gently, walked toward her and said, "I'm glad you woke up, Nezuko-chan. The mouthpiece I made for Tanjiro looks nice, huh?" Nezuko, still in a daze, replied, "The mouthpiece? Why?" With a playful smile, Makomo responded, "Just a little guarantee for the normal people, so they don't see his demonic fangs." Nezuko said nothing, nodding slightly in agreement. An odd feeling swirled in her chest, especially when her gaze met Tanjiro's. The mouthpiece on his face seemed new, yet strangely familiar. Maybe she didn't want to dwell on it, so she chose silence instead. Makomo, now speaking more seriously, said, "Come on, let's start your test." Nezuko, still struggling to think clearly, answered, "Okay." In that moment, an unsettling feeling of hunger struck her stomach. She remembered that she hadn't eaten anything, not yesterday or today. She hadn't brought anything from home. In fact, she hadn't eaten anything during the whole journey either. But something deep inside her urged her to complete this test. Makomo, with no hurry, smiled faintly and said, "Hurry up, Nezuko-chan, follow me." Without a word, Nezuko followed her. Tanjiro, who couldn't stray too far from the house, came to the door but didn't go any further. He had to be careful of the sunlight. Makomo gently walked up the mountain, and Nezuko followed behind her. An endless silence hung in the air. Only the sound of their footsteps and the wind rustling through the trees could be heard. The trees, enduring the heat of the day, towered around them. After several hours, they reached a waterfall. The sound of water crashing against rocks filled the air. Nezuko felt a strange sense of calm as she listened to the water, as though all her worries and anxieties were temporarily suspended. Makomo, watching Nezuko with a steady look, said, "You've been following me well up until now, Nezuko-chan. Your test started the moment you left the house. Your task was to follow me. But from here on, can you keep up?" Without hesitation, Makomo jumped down from the edge of the waterfall. Nezuko stood still, a question forming in her mind. Should I jump after her? A moment later, Nezuko held her breath and leaped after her. A feeling of confusion and fear engulfed her. She barely surfaced from the water, soaking wet. Disoriented and directionless, she looked around. She was going after Makomo, but she didn't know where to. In that moment, everything felt strange and complicated. If she was still a demon, everything would be easier. But now that she was human, everything felt harder. Nezuko glanced around, her attention caught by the young trees that seemed so out of place. Why were there only young trees here? Where were the old, ancient trees? Something inside her told her that this place had witnessed a great battle. Eventually, Nezuko reached Makomo's home. The place was still enveloped in silence. Makomo looked at her with a satisfied smile. Makomo said, "It took you a while to catch up." Nezuko, understanding all the effort she had put in, quietly replied, "It had to take a while, using my sixth sense." Makomo gave her a small, approving look and said, "So, you have a strong sixth sense. That's good." Nezuko, still caught up in her thoughts, glanced around and asked, "Was this your house?" Makomo, with a small, calm smile, replied, "Yes, along with Sabito and my master, Urokodaki-san." Now Nezuko understood that this place was where fierce battles had once taken place, where demons and heroes had clashed. Makomo, keeping her gaze steady, added, "Yes, it took a long time to plant the trees again. There was a lot of destruction." Nezuko, who still had many questions, decided to remain silent for now. Makomo, with a kind expression, said, "Well, considering you managed to follow me after I jumped and found me within 20 minutes, that shows you have good skills. You just need to learn how to use them. Like a raw gem, you're still unpolished." After passing the exam, Makomo-san, just as promised, began rigorous training with her. From that day on, the days and nights were spent training her body. Her training took many forms. Sometimes, Makomo-san would ask her to stand under a waterfall, a task both exhausting and challenging. 3 days a week, she would go up the mountain, and for 1 to 2 hours, she had to come back down. At first, she had more time, but now she only had a maximum of 2 hours to return. The path back was filled with traps, making it even more dangerous. To monitor her progress, once a week, she would spar with him, and despite losing one of his arms, Makomo-san always managed to win. Contrary to what she had expected, Makomo-san was very quiet, offering only brief explanations about the exercises. But she understood what needed to be done. She spent a whole year like this. Over the course of that year, the sense of hopelessness she initially felt from the exam gradually faded, and slowly she began to find hope again. She started believing in herself. Her training times varied, sometimes at night, sometimes during the day. There was no fixed schedule. Every time she returned home, she would see Tanjiro awake. It seemed like he was never sleeping, always alert. When she mentioned this to Makomo-san, he simply told her that Tanjiro was asleep when he wasn't around. Today marked exactly 1 year since the death of her family. She wanted to ask Makomo-san for permission to visit her family today. But deep down, she knew that if she went, she might not return. Today, Makomo-san had gone to meet one of the Hashira, but he hadn't said which one. He only told her to take the day to rest. I hope this captures the essence of the original passage while keeping it aligned with the character and tone. Let me know if you need any more adjustments.